It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I appreciate your presence very much. We do have visitors, and we are grateful to have you. Tonight, my wife has been awfully busy. One of the problems with buying an old house, apparently, is you never stop fixing it. So she's had somebody painting the living room, and she's been laying tile on her back porch and trying to stop all the leaks on the back porch, planning all sorts of things. Lately, though, we've been buying some new furniture. Our old furniture was beginning to wear a little thin, the stuffing coming out here and there. And as we bought, we said, well, this is the furniture we're going to die with, so let's buy some good furniture this time. The other stuff only lasted 30 years, so maybe this other stuff will last us till we're done with it, and the kids sell it in the auction. But you're constantly doing that. Some of you I know have bought new houses just recently, and so you've got goals for these houses. And the word house is used quite a bit in the New Testament as a metaphor. And so the Lord's talking with us about those metaphors quite often regarding the house. Just as surely as you have goals for the physical dwelling where you live, that's a key, kids. It's one of those questions on that test. Your house is where you live. Got that? I'm not going to give them all to you. Look at Joshua 24 and verse 15. As for me and my house, he said, we will serve the Lord. Well, he wasn't talking about the physical building. We might notice a little bit again in Matthew where it's talked about. Matthew 7 you could read verse 21 through 29 if you wanted to. Jesus compares a spiritually wise and a spiritually foolish person by contrasting the man who built his house on the rock and the man who built his house on the sand. He says, therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. So we spoke this morning of ships and sailing and that sort of thing. The Lord telling us to hold the course and set our anchor firm and to hold the helm. Well, here he uses a different illustration, this time concerning a house. And he says it's founded and built on the rock, and though there be storms all around it and difficulties in life, that the house, if it's built properly, will not fall, founded on a rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. When the winds, it's been a windy early spring, late winter here. Every now and then I'd hear some of the tin and metal and some of the roofing, some of your houses, the shingles blew off of and the siding blew off of in those big winds. I don't know whether it was for poor building or what, but there it was. There was that difficulty in those things. You might, as you think about this, move on just a little bit. There was the solid rock and the sinking sand. Joshua is saying, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. He's put it on a good footing, the best footing he can. You might also notice 2 Timothy. Houses need to be places offering more than food, more than shelter. Houses are places for spiritual teaching, to lay a foundation for a life pleasing to God. Only then will we be a vessel sanctified for honor, sanctified, as 2 Timothy 2 says, verse 20, sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. But in addition, our homes, our house needs to be full of light. The more I grumble about these lights every now and then, so I'm not talking about this building. And my wife, as I mentioned, has been remodeling the living room and painting it. And so she moved all the furniture out, including all the lights. And so I go in there for my evening session with the television, and I'm squinting because it's dim. And I said, can we bring one of those light fixtures back in here so that I can sort of see what's going on in the world without work light glaring in my eyes? The house needs to be full of light. That's the whole point of it. Jesus said in Matthew 5, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Most of us don't like too much stumbling around in the darkness. We want our homes to be well lit so we can see. The older we get, the more trouble we have with our eyes, the more important it becomes to have good light. And so we need those things. Spiritually speaking, we need houses, homes that are full of light. It exposes the danger. It guides us to our paths. You know, you get up in the middle of the night. If you're stumbling around in the dark over that vacuum cleaner your wife leaves out all the time, you're going to fall on your way to the important places you need to go in the middle of the night. When people visit your home, you know, in Hezekiah, in the case of Hezekiah, in 2 Kings 20 and verse 15, Hezekiah allowed all the Babylonian messengers. Babylon was a long way away from Hezekiah. And he was especially proud of all the wonderful things that he had. And so at the time, you know, he was concerned more with with other kingdoms. Babylon was a long way off. And so he showed them all the way through his palace and all the way through his temple. And when the prophet came to him, he asked him, what have they seen in your house? You showed them every precious thing, and in a few years, they're going to come back with an army, and they're going to take all that. Now, the question arises, though, and has been used in 1,000 sermons. What do people see in your house? What do they see in your house? Now, I'm not talking about whether your wife did the dusting or not, whether the breakfast dishes were cleared off. I'm talking about you and your children and your lives, your spiritual life. Do they see jealousy and envy and hatred, anger, spitefulness? Or do they see a house full of light? You know, in Ephesians 5, verse 8, you were once darkness, but now you are the light of the world. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. That's the light that ought to be in our lives. Yes, you need to have the right wattage of bulbs in your lamps. But the real light he's talking about is that spiritual light, known and read, well seen by your family. But in addition, you need to have a house of unity. In Matthew 12, Jesus makes the statement. He says, every house divided against itself will not stand. Abraham Lincoln gets credit for that a lot because he said it about the Civil War. But he was quoting the Bible. He was quoting the Old Testament or New Testament in Matthew 12 and verse 25. Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. Have you seen that? Have you seen situations where mom and dad are at loggerheads, or maybe they don't even live in the same home? So that the children will ask dad one thing, and he says no, and mom says yes, and vice versa. Back and forth they go. And the children are at odds with one another, competing to see who's the smartest and the best and the fastest, and who mom loves the most. It's a house divided. There is no sense of unity in this. Joshua in Joshua 24 said, "As for me and for my house, we will serve the Lord." That's a statement of family unity. We were going to stand together. You know, as we face the difficulties and trials of life, we're going to stand together in those things. And it's important for our families to be that way. Stand together, stand one for all. God intended for families to work together as a unit. You can see that in Ephesians 6 in the first 4 verses where the Lord says that children should obey their parents in the Lord, for this is right. And parents ought to deal properly with their children. They ought to stand together in all these instances. But in addition, your house needs to be a welcome place. Now, this is important, I think. It needs to be a place where people are welcome. You might notice several instances. In Luke 10, a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. Now, let me ask you a question. Who have you had at your house lately? Who's welcomed? Who's welcomed? In Luke 19, verse 5, when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, this is Zacchaeus, "Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house." So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. You're welcome. You're welcome. In Acts 2, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. Is your house that sort of house? Is it a welcoming place where the kids can bring their friends home? Where you can bring the brethren home with you? Where your neighbors are welcome to drop in and talk? Maybe eat a snack of some sort or another? Our houses need to provide welcoming moments, companionship, comfort, camaraderie to people outside of our families. You might also notice Acts 16, when this is Lydia, the seller of purple. He says, when she and her household was baptized, she begged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay." So she persuaded us. Well, Romans 12:13 talks about distributing to the necessity of the saints. Hebrews 13, Romans 12:13 adds, we should be given to hospitality. In Hebrews 13, let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. These days, our houses has become fortresses. The windows are all barred. The shades are all pulled. We have speakers at the door because we don't want to open the door to anybody. We've got bars sometimes on the doors. It's not a very welcome place. Now, I have to admit this. I have got a bunch of these welcome mats. What does your welcome mat say? I've got some of these for preaching it myself. But everybody knows I don't mean it because everybody there just walks in and cleans their feet on them. Does your welcome mat say, "Go away"? I don't want you here. I'm busy. I got other things to do and say. Does your welcome mat say, "Hope you told us you were coming over"? Because we don't want to be interrupted in what we're doing. Or does your welcome say, "Go away, I'm reading"? What does your welcome mat say? Now, folks, let's think about it. Who have you had over, entertained? Can do people feel easy to come to your house? We we hope we have a very good reason to make our dogs bark. Or does your house say, welcome? We're glad to have you here. Because this is a welcoming place. I want to tell you a story, and in fact, I'm going to read it to you. This came off of one of those Facebook stories. And I like it, so I'm going to read it to you. This is by Emma Wyatt. When I was a newlywed, my husband asked if we could invite the visiting preacher over for supper one night. I panicked. I said no. I had just barely learned to cook. And everyone knows the only appropriate meal to feed a preacher is a pot roast, right? My mama had a pot roast every Sunday I was growing up. Every time I eat pot roast anywhere, I think back to home because Mom had those. She had that down. Put the carrots and the potatoes in and a little gravy and boom, cook it for a while and you're done. It was great. Made me the man I am. I didn't know how to cook one of those, and even if I did, we couldn't afford one. My house was tiny, the furniture hand-me-downs, and my confidence was lacking. Our table could sit 3 comfortably and 4 in a squeeze. Oh, did I mention our table also doubled as all my counter space? Sam was disappointed, but he let it go. Eventually, he asked again. This time I gave in. I was only slightly less intimidated this time because the visiting preacher had specifically requested a light meal. I made soup and cut up a cantaloupe. Guess what? That soup was gratefully eaten. My tiny house was complimented. My hospitality was appreciated. I didn't grow up with a community of hospitality. My family didn't really invite people over. This was a new and somewhat scary world I was thrown into as a newlywed. It was something I wanted to engage in, but I had my own perspective of what was expected. Big house, big meal, nice furniture, hostess with great conversation skills. I had exactly 0 of 4 of these necessary qualities. No big house, no good cook, no big meal, no nice furniture, and no conversational skills. 11 years, a bigger house, nicer furniture, more room around the table later, I figured something else out. People don't care. Someone will always have a more comfortable home for hosting. Someone will always be a better cook. Someone will always have nicer furniture and a bigger table. People care that you cared enough about them to extend an invitation. And you know what? I have never cooked a pot roast for company. I've made brisket, fried chicken, enchiladas, homemade pizza, and lasagna. But I've also made hot dogs, cold-cut sandwiches, store-bought pizza, and even just served store-bought ice cream and called it supper. Hint, it doesn't matter what you serve or if you can cook. What matters is you can open up your home. You can open up your life to someone else. I'd still like my home to be perfect for company, but with 4 kids, fat chance of that happening in the next 10 years. So I could wait 10 years or I can do the best with what I have. I think I'd much rather be cultivating relationships in my home now than waiting until everything is just right. So if you come over this next month, my flooring project may or not be totally completed. And I can pretty much guarantee that my front door handle will fall off from the inside. I may also burn supper, and there's a good chance I'll forget all about making dessert. But I'll enjoy your company, and I hope you'll enjoy mine. You know, I think back to some things we've done in life. I remember my mother at one time. I'll tell you a couple of stories about my mom. Mom was preaching early on down in Louisville. Dad was preaching. Mother was seconding. And there was a family there. niece knows who they are. There's a family there who had, I don't know, umpteen kids. She had about 5 or 6. And mother invited them over one time. And they were so happy to come. They said, nobody ever invites us over. We got too many kids. But they had a wonderful time and established a terrific lifelong friendship. Another time down in Birmingham, Alabama, my dad was preaching. He invited a bunch of fancy preachers over and their wives, and mother laid on a big meal. Well, mother didn't have a whole lot of money. Preachers aren't paid the best, you know. And we ate a lot of bologna when I was a kid. So she was trying to think of what to fix it. Well, so she ground up bologna and mustard, maybe something else, put it in a fried pie. And you would think those people bragged on that, said, ooh, this is way better than that old bologna we were going to have at home. She didn't tell them it was bologna. Is your house welcome? Is it easy for you to have people over? You don't have to put on the dog. You don't have to be fancy. You just have to welcome. And that seems like what the Lord wanted us to do. In addition, our houses need to be a house of worship. I remember going up when I went to Nigeria, and I was so impressed by an old brother there. I went up to his house. It was dusk. First time I got there, the folks I was with wanted me to meet him. He was a famous preacher in Nigeria. We went up to his house, and somebody went up there to his house and knocked on the door, and I was waiting out in a little road outside. He lived hard by the synagogue. And took a while for him to come out. And he said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm sorry I took so long. We were being devout. And I so appreciated the terminology. So appreciated the fact that he was inside worshiping God with his family and didn't want to immediately interrupt that to come out and speak to that goofy, fat white guy that just came from America. It made me respect him an awful lot. In John 12, the first 3 verses, then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. She was showing what Jesus was worth after the raising of Lazarus in the previous chapter. In our homes, is Jesus exalted above and beyond everything else? Are there moments of praise, moments of prayer, moments of devotion to the Lord, so that one of us could go out and say, I'm sorry, I would have been here earlier, but we were being devout. Think about it. Judas treasured money more than Jesus. Many treasured Jesus more than money. Where would you fit it if your name was placed in this account in John 12? Of course, we want our families to be all these things. The family of God is a house too, this group, our congregation. In 1 Timothy 3 and verse 15, Paul writes, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. Doesn't it make sense that if our homes are built on a good foundation and are full of light and emphasizing unity and sharing hospitality and enjoying worship, the church will be all of that too? The only way you can build a home like this is to start tearing down the old foundations, start laying a new one with Jesus Christ. In Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 3, the scripture tells us there's a time to break down and a time to build up. Maybe it's time for you to break down and to start then building up on the rock of Christ. Tearing down's hard work. We've done that a time or two where you just had to tear down something. Nathaniel, there at our house, I had a little wood shed I had valued for years and treated the wood inside it as precious things. And Nathaniel said, Dad, it's a piece of junk. I want to build a road right through it. So lo and behold, they tore it down this winter. And I'll have to admit it needed to go. Can you look in your life and see what needs torn down? Do it, so that you can build on the rock that won't be blown away. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, we plead with you to come, believing, repent, confess Him, and be baptized. Start building that house. Come while we stand and sing. I